is how can we as a community move past statements of solidarity and into the realm of action?
I think one of the things we have to do is, as Muslims, is to look at what our resources are. Our Prophet Muhammad says the best for you is the one who is most useful in the society. That means that we have to look at our utility. And one of the ways you look at utility, of course, is having great character. And that's first. But also looking at the resources you have that can benefit the community that you live in. The Prophet ﷺ said, if Allah, you raise me up among the poor. And there's a reason for that, having that special relationship the Prophet felt about where would he be most needed? That he would ask Allah to raise him up. That's a sensitivity where he felt he would be most needed at any time in history is among the poor. He didn't say what period of history, but he said, if you raise me up among the poor. So that indicates any time in history. So realizing what resources we have, and one of the unique things we have as Muslims, in most cases, because we have such a large immigrant community, students coming over to study, and we know that we know from looking at Muslims from around the world that many Muslim countries are more impoverished than we are as African Americans in America. But yet, typically, the people who come here to this country usually they're more educated, have a high skill level, and already at the university developing their skills, educated. So one of the things we have is education. And if you look at, and I know Imam Muhammad will be able to testify this since he served on the school board, there are huge learning gaps between African Americans and Caucasians, or between low income students and students who are middle income to high. There are learning gaps, particularly in reading, math, and science. So the things that as a Muslim community we should be looking at education, and we know how our Prophet ﷺ talked about how high priority education is. When we assess what we have in the masjid, how do we get our skills and sets of learning and education to benefit the African American community or any poor community, whether it's Hispanic, African American, Caucasians, or any of those children who experience learning gaps. And those learning gaps, I say, is both from low income. That includes Caucasians, African Americans, Hispanic, all those people. So that's one of the things. The second thing is the employment. I know from my experience, when you look at Muslim businesses and Muslim places where they have decision-making ability to choose and hire individuals, you'll find similarly look for those places where Muslims have that opportunity, they have no African Americans in their businesses. So that's another place where we can be involved. The other thing too is looking at trying to find partnerships. One of the good things I can say about Carbondale is that because I've been working in African American community and social sciences and dealing with empowering people and dealing with food and health disparities in all aspects of life for African Americans and poor in general, is that we have had opportunities, like we got a food pantry, and then on occasions that I've presented proposals to help African Americans, and they've responded real well. So I think that part of that, another part of that is also interfaith communities. I spent almost over 25 years on Interfaith Dialogues, which help shape and change how we interact. I remember speaking at Interfaith Dialogues, and Imam W.D. Muhammad helped issue that in for our community, that this is a must, because growing up in African American communities, we still got our relatives, not like many other communities in the world, we still got our relatives who are Christian, and we grew up with a Christian. So by our natural design, we're communicating with Christians all day long, everywhere just about. So And now we're known as Muslims. We're known similar way the Prophet ﷺ is known among our family, among the community members as trustworthy people, as honored people who look to us, up to us because of our character. Mm. And also because of our character. And so Muslims, if we can do a better job of hiring, do a better job of finding a partnership, not-for-profit agency that works in the African American community and form a partnership with that organization so they can work through that organization by putting resources into the community, also using their influence to help the doctors. How can we get more African Americans into the hospitals? How can we get more African Americans in other jobs and contributing to helping educate that would help qualify and get skill sets to more young African Americans and really help to reduce those learning gaps. And an example of what the community can be more involved with, for instance, you can have a high level of African Americans from high school, but their skill set and their skill level is such that they have less than 8th grade reading levels, less than 6th grade math, and makes them not able to compete in the open job market. And when Haneef was saying earlier, you got to be twice as good. Well, that's very hard given the way the educational system is set up. It just moves children along. So I think the message is resources. Education is one. Sometimes financial resources is another. But then partnerships, agencies within the community they can work with to see that we get more of those resources, more of those opportunities, more dollars, more into the community by finding a partnership agency in the community or working with African Americans, individuals, African Americans. Someone who experienced Imam Ahmed, Haneef, the other members of the Champagne community is, they say, hey, what is it you think if you had some resources, which could you do to help the community? Because we have expertise, we have skill set, and we have people with knowledge of the community, they have knowledge of resources. If we would just ask how can we help through those members like you have in Champagne, same thing happens here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the importance of bridging gaps. And I think that's also when it comes to activism is finding what you're good at, what can you offer? Everybody has something that they can do to help the progress for African Americans in this country. If you're a tech person.
One other thing quickly. Also, the issue of that Haneef mentioned earlier, and Imam Muhammad has been involved in this too, is how to help reintegrate people from returning citizens back into the community. If we always said this, if we had the same conversion rate of Muslims on the street that we have in the prisons, you have so many more Muslims. Having and most of our efforts is not only helping people, help them come out and prepare themselves to be Muslims on the street. So also working to help set up reintegration programs for Muslims, halfway houses, making contribution to halfway houses, making contribution to setting up additional training for people who are particularly Muslims returning or other individuals who are not Muslims returning to African American poor communities. That's all I have to say.
Is a very important issue, and I've heard people that were previously incarcerated and said they had a sense of brotherhood inside prison, and then when they came out, that support and that sense of brotherhood was not there. And it really made it hard for them to have a continuation with their deen. And so yes, another important aspect of how what needs to be our priorities. So I'm going to actually bring it back to Brother Muhammad Abdullah. And my question for you is, what are some historical moments / lessons that you find applicable in the current context?
So historically, to broaden it out a little bit, historically, the country itself is established on a system where African Americans are enslaved. And then after that enslavement, emancipation, and desegregation, and then after emancipation and then segregation and desegregation. So for our generation, like Haneef and Imam Haqq, and for our generation, there's a period of time in the 60s where our identity is being redefined. If you listen to Dr. King or some of those civil rights leaders, their terminology is Negroes in the early 1960s, 1964, 1965, the terminology is Negroes. But by the time our generation comes along, that terminology is not acceptable to us, and the term is shifting, and that generation is also sort of rejecting. Our generation is sort of rejecting the approach that Dr. King is using, and it's a little more militant. It's a little more willing to push against institutions that are perpetuating racism. So we get influenced by people like, not necessarily Dr. King, we get influenced by people like Malcolm X and people like Muhammad Ali during his time.
Muhammad, why it's very, it's lagging a little. You're cutting and it's.
Okay. So
I'm not
when
sure
I hear
why. I think when you start to talk about
I'm coming in and out. Takeya. Takeya.
She's the one that's
So you're freezing and your frame is freezing?
yeah.
So you're on mute. Takeya, you're on mute.
I think you can go ahead, Muhammad. I think she's frozen.
Okay. So I was saying that essentially that now there's a shift that's taking place from desegregation, the movement of desegregation, and the next generation coming along. And that next generation coming along, really because it's not taking a passive approach, it starts to force change in institutions that are perpetuating racism. So one of the things that happened, sort of as an example, when the riots took place after Dr. King's assassination in Chicago, and then the state, the officials in the state became so alarmed about the kind of things that were happening in protesting and riots and things like that. They started at the University of Illinois Project 500. University of Illinois never had no more than, out of a population of 30,000 students, they may have 200 or 300 African Americans. Never had a large number of African Americans. But because of the riots that were going on across the country, and especially because of the riots in Chicago, they went out to recruit African Americans to come to the University of Illinois, which means that, so now this protest is starting to force change within institutions. So this is a generation, so this is Dr. King's movement that's not getting the change. But then when you get this uprising, then the institutions start to realize we need to act, we need to do something, we need to provide more opportunities. So then you have institutions trying to allocate funds and resources and different things like that to say, okay, we need to provide more opportunities in order to calm the situation down. The unfortunate thing about when they did that, say students who came for Project 500, most of them are coming out of the Chicago area, coming from public schools that were not prepared, that didn't have the educational system to actually to make them competent enough to be able to compete at the University of Illinois. So now they bring those students in, they provide more resources in order to say, okay, you can come to U of I, but they're going to fail. They're going to fail because there was never any preparation for them coming to the U of I. never any resource provided for them coming to U of I. So now it looks like we gave you opportunity, but you were not up to the challenge. So so you can force change with protests and things like that, but the society can sometimes provide opportunity and use it as a tool of manipulation to say you're not qualified. We gave you opportunity, but you're not qualified. One of the things that's happened with Project 500, when those students came down here, they did not pre-plan and provide them with housing. They put them in, I think, ISR at the time, Illinois Residence Hall. They put them in the residence hall, Illinois Residence Hall, but they didn't have enough space for them. And so those students, they protested. They occupied. I don't remember if it was the Line Union or the residence hall or whatever. Anyway, they occupied that, and then they started breaking up things like that. You know what Chicago newspaper said? Chicago newspaper Tribune, I believe. It said something like Negroes riot and are ungrateful. You know? So now it looks like your image now is being tarnished. We gave you opportunity, but look what you did with the opportunity. It was sort of like planned failure. Sometimes you can get the institutions to make adjustments, but the manipulation is what's important. So our generation got manipulated. The generation that the Black Power and those, our generation got manipulated. It got manipulated because once the institutions open up, the institutions, they had another plan that we did not anticipate. And one of the plans that and this comes out in a book about Richard Nixon. One of the plans that they had was to flood Black communities with drugs. And then once you flood Black communities with drugs, then you can you got justification for militarizing the police. And so I'm essentially saying that you can force change, but you also have to be aware of the system, and the system is sometimes 3 and 4 steps ahead of you, figuring out how we're going to make you look bad. We gave you opportunity, but you're not prepared to take advantage of opportunity. So the failure is on your part, not on our part. So we came through that particular generation, that pushed for the change, got change to happen, but then got manipulated. So part of the responsibility that happened for us as Muslims, when I came into Islam in 1972, part of the responsibility that happened for us is to recognize is that our community is being manipulated, and our community is being flooded with drugs. And so part of our responsibility was, that's why I was on the Concerned Citizens of Better Neighborhoods. Part of our responsibility was to ensure that we did not allow those kind of elements to actually become the dominant element in our communities. That was probably the main thrust for the Nation of Islam, to more or less say, we're going to save our own communities. We don't need you to save our community. We're going to save our own communities. And so that was the kind of thing that I became aware of as part of that movement, part of the 1960 movement, Black Power movement, and then transitioning to as a Muslim, and realizing that the friends I grew up with, the people I grew up with, how they're being manipulated, and they're being manipulated in such a way that they're actually harming their own communities. And so what you normally hear the phrase, once you become a Muslim, you got street cred. When you go back to those neighborhoods, they know you. You grew up with them. And when you come back and say to those neighborhoods and more or less say, we don't want that stuff around here. We're not going to allow you to do that in our neighborhood. You got credibility. And one of the things that disappointed me most is when I became involved with the immigrant Muslims, is that that same kind of social activism did not exist. And there was a period of time that actually my thrust for social activism got stifled, because I'm trying to adjust to this new normal of trying to learn Islam in the context of what is being called the Quran and Sunnah. And I'm being more or less told that, okay, well, those are kafir, you don't have to worry about those people. So current events is more or less saying Muslims are still falling victim to this kind of mentality. This is not our fight. This is not our, Black Lives Matter. This is not our fight. Still falling victim to that kind of mentality.
Yeah. So much important points. I wish I could, further discuss them. I know for time we're trying to get to all the other questions, but yeah, these were all excellent points. So I'm going to move it to Sister Haqiya, and I'm going to. One of the submitted questions was, what does a healthy and conscious community look like to you?
Healthy, conscious communities. It's our responsibility to protect, to care for the elders, children, the young people, women that are divorced or widowed or whatever, their children, so that our future generations, don't grow up without guidance. If I personally have raised a grandson, and it doesn't matter how good a job I do as a woman, if he doesn't have a male role model, if he doesn't have someone to help him, I can't help him to become a man, because I'm not a man. So on that level, on a personal level, that's one of our responsibilities. And as Brother Muhammad, Haneef, and Brother Haneef and Imam Abdul Haqq said, we have to help others, our immigrant communities, to understand that Black Lives Mattering it's important. If it weren't for the movement, the Islamic movements in this country that came out of the nation, and Imam Within Muhammad, may Allah forgive him sins and grant him Jannah. We laid the foundation for those other communities to be here. You know what I mean? To have the ability to practice Islam. And I believe it was Haneef that said that many times they want to come in and tell us what to do, tell us how, because they look at us in a certain way. And I want to go back to what you said about people coming to this country and not getting propagandized, I guess, about what to do and how to act from their government and our government. They are told. I don't know about Muslims in particular, but I know personally a woman from Vietnam, a couple that I worked with at Head Start, that said that they show them films and talk to them about staying away from Black folks. Don't mess with them. You want to be wiped, in other words. If you want to succeed in this country, stay away from them. So our responsibility is to enlighten, is to inform people so they don't fall into those traps of believing that we're the boogeyman. You know what I mean? What Brother Muhammad just said was like amazing.
Yeah.
Because as a young Muslim, I don't know. I'll answer on, you know, my my advice to my younger self. But one of the things that I didn't do, I didn't analyze a lot. I was like, you know, I'm just gonna do this. I didn't think about, you know, I didn't really think about what I was doing when I was younger and how that was affecting us as a community. I was all for being in that march when Woolworths, I remember being in beauty school and coming out and they were marching against Woolworths because they wouldn't hire Black people there. I grabbed the sign and got right into the, you know, I got right in there with them. I remember having a pin on that said, "Free Joanne Chisholm." That was Asata Shakur. I didn't even know who she was, but I was down with that movement. I told my sister, if I had been in Oakland when the Panthers were, I would have been a Panther. She said, you were in Danville and you were still a Panther, as much as one you could be in Danville. Yeah. So, you know, I think our responsibility is to help them to see, you know, help them to understand our role and their role, you know. And my Imam Haqq said, you know, get in where you can fit in, do what you need, what you're able to do, you know, whatever you're able to offer, then that's what you should offer. I know I got off subject. That's just how I talk. But
no, excellent points.
Inshallah.
Excellent points. You know, and I think dealing with the current situation, you know, my mother's always saying that we have to connect the dots. She talks about that a lot, especially with her activism, you know, and I think that, you know, right now, sometimes they were just focused on justice for George Floyd, not looking at the systematic situation, right, of police brutality. Right. And, you know, when I've been posting things about, you know, defunding the police, what does that look like? How would that play out in a community? Because people are only focused very narrow, you know, they aren't not thinking about the bigger picture. And, you know, it's not just a few bad apples, you know, it's not just, and, you know, I love what Chris Rock said, you know, he's like, there's some professions that you just can't have a few bad apples, you know, doctors, police officers, you know, places where people's lives are in your hand, you can't have a couple of, you know, few bad apples. And so same thing, you know, in the current situation when we're fighting for, you know, accountability within police force, and we're talking about defunding that, it's also bringing the idea of this is a problem that is rampant within that particular institution, you know? So it's very important that you're, when you're fighting and when you're protesting, you have a strategic plan. And like, you know, Brother Muhammad Abdullah said, not to get bamboozled or manipulated. So I'm going to actually, Alhamdulillah, I'm going to actually lead it now to Brother Haneef. And one of the questions that were submitted was, how do you envision anti-racist education within a mosque space? What does it look like, feel like, and sound like? So I know that's kind of a wide question, but and you obviously having, you know, 6 children who grew up in this community, and was involved in the masjid. I think, you know, alhamdulillah, you have a lot to offer as far as answering this question.
Basically, we have everything we need in the Quran and the Sunnah, if we would only follow it. Allah tells us about black and white. There's no black over a white and no white over a black. You know, we just watched this series this week, Black Lives and the Messenger. And in that, he talked about, Brother Mendez talked about the blacks around the messenger who were Ethiopian, who we had never heard of. We had never been exposed to some of those people. All we've been brought to was Bilal. That's what everybody throws at us as the example of a black man. But Ayman was around the Prophet his whole life, from his birth until his death. And so we need to be aware of those things. We need to teach that to our children. We need to expose ourselves to that and be aware of all those things around us. And when people come to you and make claims, don't just dismiss them listen and respond and react and do something about it. And invite those in your community who have experience, like Brother Haqq, like Brother Muhammad, who can address the issues that are facing all of us. It affects all of us, not just the Black community. When you don't follow Islam, you don't follow the teaching of Islam, it affects all of us.
Yeah, and I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm not sure if I answered the question, but you know,
no,
there's some things, you know, like my wife was telling me this morning, someone, when my daughter was born, said, you know, your baby is so beautiful, she's not gonna have any problem finding a husband. It was only about her looks, because she was light skinned, and because it had nothing to do with her, what her character would be 20 years later. And even someone said to your mother, you know, why would you marry a Black man?
Yeah, it was in, I still remember, like, it was in our living room. And of course, my mother was quite shocked by the answer. But yeah, I think those individuals that were in during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, imagine what that would mean for a student in a Sunday school or weekend school, how they would connect, how it could make them, you know, have a reflection about themselves. It's huge. It's huge. It can completely change the way they look at their religion, their deen. And it's something very easy to do, you know. And I remember one time at one of the weekend schools that my children went to, they gave, you know, these coloring books, and the coloring book had this little white girl with like long blonde hair, and then the thing, it was like mentioning how beautiful she was. And I told the administration at the time, I was like, you know, first of all, you're giving this to a little girl of color, but let me remind you that half of the children in here maybe not be African American, but are children of color as well. So imagine what you're telling them, you know. And like, luckily she took it away and it's like, you know, you're completely right. But you know, it's like this it's just like not being conscious on these issues, not even the thought process of what that would mean. You know, and it was something small, but you know, when I addressed it, it was very important to me. When you gave that to my children who don't look anything like that little girl, you know, that blonde-eyed, blue-eyed, blonde-haired little girl on the coloring book. And so, yeah, so these things, you know, it should definitely be a part. And honestly, we really need, you know, I spent a lot of time at Dean this year focusing, we spent our end of the semester, a whole unit on Islam in America, where we focused on, you know, the first Muslims that were slaves, you know, and what does that mean to you? Even if you're not African American, what does that mean to you being a citizen of this country? And so this particular, you know, this needs to be taught in deacon schools, Islamic schools. And like you said, you know, Sister Haqiya, that how we paved the way, right, for people that are coming here from other countries, you know. And I remember Imam Haqq actually did an interview and we showed it to the kids in my class, and he said, you know, there was a lot of immigrants who were coming who didn't know how to kind of display their Islam. And so when they saw African Americans who were proud, you know, specifically Nation of Islam, and African American Muslims that were not only proud to represent their religion but were verbal about it, it gave them also a sense of pride, and it kind of gave them an example to look to. So these type of things need to be taught in, I don't care if it's a Sunday school, a weekend school, Islamic school, that needs to be a part of the curriculum. So yes, I think you answered the question excellent. I am going to actually lead the question actually over to, let me see. I think this is, you know, a little bit of a heavy question, but I definitely think it needs to be addressed. So I'm going to, and Brother Muhammad was one that was going to take it on, which is question number 11 that was submitted. How does European colonialism play into the racism we find in other countries, and that is obviously brought here within our communities as well?
Yeah, so you know, what I noticed about Muslims, I should say that my experience early on with Muslims in this community was very good, because there were some individuals who were very committed to helping us to understand the teachings of Islam, and learning how to do some basic recitation and things like that. So my experience was very good with Brother Walid and brother named Sadiq Qataris. So it was a very good experience. But what I did notice is that Muslims came here with a, and I think this has already been mentioned, they came here with a sort of preconceived notion about African Americans. The tendency was to be closer to white Americans, even though as African Americans we were Muslim, but we were not seen as on the same level as white Americans who were not Muslims. So I noticed that, and I noticed this from the subcontinent. And one brother who was an Arab brother told me, he said, this is after I had gave a khutbah and mentioned a certain thing. I mentioned that I went to a conference. This is, it says low battery. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I went to a conference, and at the conference, some brothers from here, they invited me to go. And there was a speaker, a scholar now he looks like he was an Indian. So after he had given his lecture, I was going to ask him a few questions. I saw him in the library. This is in Bridgeview. I saw him in the library, a little small library they had there, and I was going to ask him a few questions. So I went to approach him, and he looked at me in such a condescending way, as if, "What are you doing here?" So I didn't even approach him. I turned around and I walked out of that place, that library. So he's the scholar who's presenting, and he's obviously should be giving the best example of Islam. And so I was disturbed to see that here I am, African American who's experiencing racism in America, and then I'm coming into Islam and hearing these teachings about the Prophet and the Brotherhood of Islam, and my experiences when I go outside of this community, I'm experiencing the same kind of prejudice and racism that I experienced from white Americans. And this is, in my opinion, Muslim identity or European colonial, the colonial occupation of Muslim lands affected Muslims to such an extent that they began to idolize. If you wanted to be an intellectual coming from some of these countries, subcontinent or Africa, then you went to England, you went to Paris, you went to London, you went to Paris, you were educated in those kind of institutions. And so, that mentality of looking up and sort of idolizing colonial masters to a certain extent became such a like a standard for measuring other individuals that Muslims lost their Islam. They lost the teachings of the Prophet because they were trying to sort of measure themselves against Europeans and wanted to be seen in a light that Europeans would respect them. And so what I experienced for some Muslims coming here is this kind of and I hate to put it like this, but they had a low self-esteem for themselves. They did not value themselves as in terms of their Islam or in terms of their heritage. They were trying to measure up to standards that were set by Europeans. And to me, this is the effect of colonial occupation of Muslim lands.
Yeah, and it was Malcolm X who said, "Who taught you to hate yourself from your head to your toe?" From the top to the bottom. And this idea, and it's so sad because I think when we're talking about colorism too, specifically, there were some comments that were made about, being able to find a husband easier than others because of your white skin. You know, this conversation has to doesn't only have to happen within African American communities, but it needs to happen in all areas where there are people of color. Understanding self-love and you know, your own true beauty is a discussion that I've been saying, you know, needs to happen all around the world, because, you know, it's obviously been lost to value oneself in the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you. So inshallah, because of time, I am going to have one more question, and I am going to let actually Imam Haqq answer this one, and then inshallah we'll have concluding remarks. And I wanted to ask actually Imam Haqq also, if you could end it with a dua, inshallah. So I wanted to give you a heads up that I was going to ask you that. But the question that was submitted was, how has Islam shaped the way that you engage in community work that is focused on fighting oppression and racial injustices? Oh, you're muted, brother.
I wanted to read something that I had written for Muslims, and not only Muslims, but in general, our concern for what the current events are showing. Mm-hmm. Before that, I wanted to comment something on what Imam Muhammad Abdullah said, as well as something Haqiya said, and that is Muslim identity. I remember even when I was in the nation, I'd pass students and I would say, Assalamu alaikum. And they would turn around and say, "You know Muslim? How you know Muslim?" They would be offended. They didn't want to even get return the greetings because of the identity, and didn't want to accept the fact that that there was a religion that was almost shameful, that they would even accept returning the greetings and get offended that you gave it to them. So, alhamdulillah, this is something I wrote that I think may have give some answers to this. And this is regarding the current situation. It said, Muslims are compelled by the guides of the Quran and the example of the completed prophetic life of Muhammad the Prophet, peace be upon him, to follow him in the guidance individually and stand and support Black Lives Matter's sacred call for inclusion and justice, and its inherent destiny of peace and security and the pursuit of happiness. The recent events of murder of Black America continue to demonstrate America's inability to eliminate the institutionalization of racism at every level that is highlighted by the misuse of authority. Our religion guarantees the Muslim's role and right to address the inherent and innate effort for justice and the end to oppression, and the struggle for how to use a merciful gift from our Creator of empowering a human being with discretion in decision-making. Two sources of guidance in our religion issue warnings. First, from the Quran. Do not knowingly misappropriate things entrusted to you, and when you judge between people, judge with justice. And our Prophet Muhammad said, in preparing us for the judgment, stated, on the day of judgment, you will be questioned about how you use your authority. We are reminded again and again the importance of justice. First, Allah tells the Prophet to say that oppression is forbidden for himself as well as for you, so do not oppress one another. Allah warns us that justice is sacred, that even if you are influenced by the strongest emotion, hatred, do not let your hatred of a person or people have you decline to be just, for justice is next to righteousness. And then Allah says on accountability, Allah says, O you have believed, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even as the witnesses against yourselves or your parents or your kin, and whether the person concerned be rich or poor. Allah has a greater right over them. So do not follow your desires and deviate from being just. If you distort justice or turn away from it, truly Allah is aware of whatever you do. And finally, I close with the statement the Prophet states on the importance of power of education and treasuring and learning from our diversity to remove prejudice and racial supremacy from the consciousness and institutions of this world. To that end, Muslims should be expanding this effort to actively work within the African American community and work with the citizenry of those communities, businesses, civic and entities of government remove the barriers that inhibit the fulfillment of America's social contract with African Americans.
Wow, beautifully written. Jazakallah khair. By the way, I just forgot that I just looked at my my notes, and I remember that it's very important before I actually come to a conclusion. I know we're running, short on time.
We're not running late. We started real late. Remember,
This is true. Yeah, we didn't start exactly. So I know, inshallah, yeah, we need to. Jazakallah khair for reminding of that. Okay. So I really wanted to give everyone an opportunity to focus on, obviously, solutions, and then ways that this particular issue can be corrected and eliminated. So I'm going to actually come to that part of the program where I'm going to let everybody individually, address that, offering solutions or suggestions on how this concern can be corrected and eliminated. And then if you have seen or found a solution. So I'm going to bring it to Brother Haneef, inshallah, first to offer any suggestions or solutions.
I, at most times, try to look at the glass as half full. When it comes to race in America, I'm a pessimist. We thought when we elected Obama that we'd see some changes in the way America treats us. It didn't happen. We see the fervor around the death of recent African Americans, and my hope is that that fervor will continue. But my pessimism tells me that we will be back here in the same place, and not too far future. My prayer is that as Muslims, we can rise above our differences and come together in the understanding that we all are in this together. And I pray that as a community, we can understand each other better and plan to do better, inshallah.
Inshallah. Brother Muhammad Abdullah, please, offer any suggestions or solutions, ways to correct this issue and eliminate it.
This issue is a challenging issue. It's a challenging issue not just for America, but it's a challenging issue for the world. You say racism in America, and the Prophet is addressing racism in his last address. So we're talking about centuries of something that's ingrained in many societies. So this is not an easy. There's no easy solution. There's no easy answer for any of these kind of things that we're dealing with now. But I think for Muslims, my hope is, and this was my hope when I entered into Islam. My hope is that we become the standard. Muslims become the standard for how to overcome these issues surrounding race, surrounding ethnicity, surrounding tribalism, and we become the standard. But in order to get there, we have our own history and our own struggles against the things that have existed among Muslims during the time of the Prophet and after the Prophet, and those things are still persisting among us. So my hope is in the generation coming. My hope is in your generation and the generations coming. My hope is in the ones who are looking at this issue, looking at it clearly from the standpoint of what we should be doing as Muslims, what should be our position as Muslims, how we should be behaving in addressing these things as Muslims. I think too often it has been my nationality, my cultural background, my ethnic identity, but the foundation for all of us has to do with the teachings that have come from the Quran and the life example of Prophet Muhammad. So how we should address this as Muslims. And I think this initiative that you've taken, the group has taken, it shows that, okay, well, there's hope. Maybe not necessarily right away, but there's hope. So I think the future has something to offer. I always envision the mosque as a place for teaching people how to have peaceful coexistence, how to have harmony between different cultures and different races, different ethnicities. I always envision the mosque as being that place. I always envision the mosque as being the place of Islam, where you learn peace and you learn to peacefully coexist with other individuals, regardless of their background. It's going to get there, I believe. That's my hope.
Inshallah, your vision of that will come to light, and inshallah be a reality for all of us, my generation, the next generation to come. Okay, inshallah, Sister Haqiya, if you could shed light on any solutions, suggestions, also if you've seen any solutions that you think has helped, to eradicate racism within our communities.
Bismillah. Racism actually originated with Shaitan. I think that's why it's so difficult, because that's where it started. Adam was made out of clay, and Allah used clay from different parts of the world, and dirt, black, is not the recessive gene, not the recessive color. You mix those things together, you come up with black, and so Adam was like, I'm not bowing down to him, I'm better than him. And I think that that's where this whole thing came from. And that's why it's so hard to get rid of. People don't want to admit. One of the questions was, how is it that people can't see that they're racist? Or how is it that Allah put in us the enlightenment between wrong and right. He put that in the soul. So we know, all of us know the difference between right and wrong. We know that racism is wrong. But if we examine that, if we do self-examination and think about it and really go into ourselves, then we have to deal with it. And people don't want to deal with it. It's difficult. It's hard to deal with. And so instead of dealing with it, we pretend like it doesn't exist. I don't see color. I like everybody. But, your actions don't show that. So, yes, I think there's hope because Allah created us, And so the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had hope. We have to, believe that it's possible. But we have to work very hard towards it. We have to work very, very hard towards it. So I think having conversations that are difficult with people that you like, that you love, that you don't want to hurt their feelings, but you have to stand toe to toe with it. You have to deal with it, because if you don't, it festers. It doesn't go away. So yeah, I think that, therein lies the problem. We have to see racism as just what it is, Shaitan. And none of us want to be his friend. Allah said, stay away from him. Don't take him as your protector, or your friend. So inshallah, I pray that we get to that. Inshallah.
Yeah. Bashir, I was listening to Bashir Jones. He was a guest speaker on one of the Sahih Web's Zoom meetings. And so, yeah, he was saying, he's like, the first sin was, arrogance, and it was racism, it was a version of racism. Shaitan didn't want to bow down because he was made of fire. And, Adam was beneath him, alayhi salam. So, so I think that's important to remember that whenever you are, either acting on racism, you are, obviously taking after the shaitan. And if you see it and don't address it, you're allowing that to take place. And, that's a characteristic of shaitan. May Allah protect us from him. So lastly, I mean, I'm going to bring it to Imam Haqq to please, give us any suggestions and solutions for our audience on how they can, if not eradicate racism, at least learn how to deal with it, address it, change it. By the way, you're muted.
One of the things we have to realize is that this is a struggle, and I remember Muhammad once said that this is a relay race, and as Imam Muhammad Abdullah said, this is a time. When I realized sometime in my early life as a Muslim that people had given me batons. There was hope given to me. There were people who passed things on to me. And, and I tell young people all the time, I say, I got a lot of batons. I'm looking for who I can give them to and continue this race. And I believe since I didn't know who I was going to become, I can't find anything in my early life that would determine that I would be a Muslim, that I would be in the position of life that I'm in. So if Allah has allowed me and Haneef, Takeya, and there are some of the brothers who are not here with us, Hakeem, Brother Imam Shabazz, others who we've been with, and we all didn't see ourselves where we were. So that lets me know that there are others in this generation, either from my family or from others who in this generation who are going to be better than we were. Because I know that I did everything I could to make my children better than me. And also anybody I've tried to help was not to keep them underneath me or beneath me, but inshallah contribute to their journey to be the best they can be. So I hope in the future and know that it will get done, because Allah says it's going to get done. And we have faith and trust that we will be that community that Allah says, as Imam Muhammad mentioned earlier, that we'll be a witness community. And Allah says in the Quran of us that we will be the most balanced community, and we'll be a witness to all the nations. But all of us not going to be in that community. Allah said, evolve out of your people, right? There was some evolve out of us, right? Some of the best that's come out of this community. And I think we have to trust the Muslim community. We have to trust people's intelligence, and give people freedom to speech and freedom to engage, to practice shura bainahum, to practice mutual consultation, and give voice to every member of the Muslim community, and try to give every person, because one of the things racism do is try to strip you of your voice. One thing power does is try to take away your voice, take away your spirit, and take away from your ability that you can affect change. And our Prophet Muhammad said, when a Muslim sees something wrong, he corrects it with his hands. He corrected with his speech. He came with his speech. The least of faith is rejected in your heart. But we have to remember too that the reverse is true. You sometimes can't change things. First, you reject it in your heart, in your soul. Then you can find a voice for it. Then you can find the conduct for it. In fact, we see our Prophet ﷺ, the Quran was revealed to his heart. Then he came to the speech, and then finally he came to the correction. So that's what I feel is best for us, and this is what our future holds for us. We can, it's like Dr. King said, he'd been to the mountaintop and he see, and I believe we see. I see what's coming. Allah is blessing us with vision to see what's coming. Otherwise, we would have stopped a long time ago. We would have stopped a long time ago, because we believe in this inevitability of Allah's creation of excellence in us as human beings and our moral fiber. So we ask Allah to help us and strengthen us. And remember that as Muslims, one of the reasons this is not something you can just say, okay, as a community, we all going to get rid of it. No, it's an individual commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And don't let your effort for individual commitment to change this be shouted down by others who try to make you shame the fact you want to stand up for it.
Mm-hmm.
That we have to have that individual courage as Muslims. And we got to remember what the Prophet said too about something. He said, when a Muslim does something wrong, a little wavering goes on in his heart.
Mm-hmm.
He gets legal opinion or public opinion that it's all right to do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the community. And so our efforts, we ask Allah to guide us and bless us, have the courage. And we pray that this generation also accept that there's wisdom for them to come to. And we're here. We are resources. We're not trying to take over anything. But we want to be used what Allah has blessed us with to help in the future. Mm-hmm. And that's what elders should be. And we pray Allah that people will use us and bless us with the example and the victory granted to Muhammad. Ameen.
Ameen, ameen, ameen. Just like her beautiful takeaways. I'm going to try to conclude as much as I can. There were so many important points made in this discussion. But some things that I wrote down that I thought, inshallah, to reiterate before we end this evening, is the importance of, education. When we're looking in Muslim communities, the importance of education of the examples of people of color during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way we choose to engage with African Americans and look at the history of Muslims in America within our weekend schools, Islamic schools. This has to be made of an importance as when we're talking about dealing with racism within our community. The importance, one of the comments that was made is that inshallah will be the standard, will be the example to look to as an example of what it looks like to have true brotherhood, true sisterhood. And inshallah, this generation, inshallah, and for the generations to come, will be able to establish that. Another thing that was mentioned tonight was the importance of making sure that when we're protesting, that we don't get manipulated with the ideas of how the system is going to work against that, whatever's being asked. Muhammad Abdullah talked about, here people were taken into the streets, and then U of I came up with, a plan, obviously, to have African Americans come to the university, but didn't set up the resources to help them, further. And so it's important that when we're strategic, we have strategic plans when we're looking at how to help this particular issue. Another thing that I thought was really important is the idea of hope. In the last couple of weeks, I've had, if you're on social media of any sorts, it's been very exhausting, dealing with personal accounts of racism with people that and also just on a broader scale with the news and how, it's portraying the movement and African Americans. And so you lose hope. And alhamdulillah, all of the panelists talked about hope, the importance of also realizing that as Muslims, we have everything we need. We have the Quran and Sunnah as the best guides on how we should work towards justice and equality for all. Alhamdulillah, it was a really a beautiful event. And I felt really blessed that I was able to be just a part of it in any sorts, even as a moderator, in a small part, but I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Inshallah, I ask Allah that He allows us, inshallah, to take the step towards Him, and He will come running to us. And this applies to with our own internal reflection of our own biases and racism that we may have, and then to Allah help us to extend it within our family settings, within our social settings, and within our community settings, so that we may, it was mentioned earlier, to be the standard and an example of what it truly means to have true brotherhood and sisterhood. Allahumma ameen. I thank you for all for coming.
Sister Kia, one thing.
Yes.
I also pray that everyone sees from us, the panel members, that we still in the fight.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
We haven't retired. We're still in the fight. We just can't march like we used to.
Yes, you guys,
we're still in this fight. We still in this fight.
Yeah, for sure. Alhamdulillah. I was talking to someone who was talking about the importance of oral traditions and writing the history of the the people in our communities who have been in the fight. And so Yes, subhanAllah, you guys are a great example. And like as a young person, not that young, but younger, a little bit younger, I really was, moved by your testimonials this evening. And I can't wait for my children to be able to observe this and watch this event. So it's been very, there's so much rich knowledge that was given this evening. So yes, for sure, you guys are still in the fight. We need you. We cannot do it without you guys. You guys are hoping for for this generation, but we're looking to you guys. So for sure, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
We thank you for the initiative. We really thank you for the initiative.
I mean,
Jazakallah khair. I would like to say also for the viewers that inshallah this discussion will be continuing with weeks to come. We'll have different people, different panelists, focusing on with different areas of racism within our community. So please do, stay tuned for more information on those events. And there'll be other moderators too. So inshallah, we'll be having other people at the table to discuss this. So this is an ongoing thing. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Thank you all once again, for committing to this and for just being so, true and bringing truth to this discussion. So I'm truly appreciative of all of you and the effort that we did tonight. I really think that it'll be a gem, honestly, a benefit to those who join and listen.
Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.